What's up, YouTube? Zazubaar here. I'm going to do a video that I promised a friend I would do about a movie I don't want to talk about. If you can't guess from my tone, it's Godzilla 1998. Well, I kind of want to start forgetting about about that movie, because here's my little thing about Godzilla 98. Yeah, the movie's bad. It's clearly known that it's a bad movie. But it's so offensive to Godzilla fans that I think that we need to both forget and remember 98 now that the reboot's happening. The reboot should do everything 98 did wrong right, and then do things that 98 never would have done, and do them just as good as everything else. And once it does that, we need to forget about 98. But we also need to remember 98's mistakes, so that way we don't make them in the future. It's the classic idea of men who forget the past keep repeating it, and I agree with that. I don't think that we should just pretend 98 never happened, because if we did that, we might make another Godzilla 98. And I don't want that to happen at all. Obviously, I want this movie to be good. I want it to be a Godzilla reboot, and which is what 98 should have been and wasn't. I mean, technically, yeah, it was a reboot, but it wasn't a good reboot. It didn't do what it should have done. And the path Legendary is taking, it looks like they're going to do that. And that's why I don't think we should forget about it. I think that we should just kind of acknowledge that it's a bad movie and then move on. Like, yeah, it's bad, we should move on. But what I'm going to talk about today is actually kind of cool. It's interesting. Spidey Fan alerted me to a script that was never filmed for a sequel to the Godzilla 98 disaster piece, known as Godzilla 2. Yeah, creative title. I'm not here to make fun of the title. I'm just saying. Anyway, Godzilla 2 was canned because although the movie was extremely successful, it was just annihilated by critics and fans. Anyone who knew anything about Godzilla despised the movie, from what I know. I mean, there are Godzilla fans who look at it in kind of a lighthearted nature and just say it's enjoyable, which, yeah, it kind of is. It's a nice little popcorn monster movie, and that's how I'm starting to view it. Now that we're getting a Godzilla reboot, an American one, I can kind of forgive 98 as offensive to Godzilla fans, since Legendary is cleaning up the mess that Sony caused. But so I can start to watch it now as kind of just a popcorn monster movie that isn't very intelligent, but fun to watch. And yeah, 98 at points is fun to watch. The action is pretty good. The CG effects on Zilla are really good. They're just as realistic and fluid and very lifelike as Jurassic Park was. And of course, that's because Godzilla 98 was trying to be everything Jurassic Park was in a lot of parts that it wasn't. You see, the thing about 98 that I have a problem with is that it is a ripoff of Jurassic Park when it should have been borrowing from Godzilla. It should have had military and not in a car running around from a dinosaur. And okay, I'm getting off track. I apologize. And yeah, the CG effects are really good, I got to admit. For that time period, they're very good. They're up to par with Transformers, in my opinion. So I can watch 98 as a straightforward popcorn monster movie. I hope that I've gotten that point across in the past, and if I haven't, I can watch 98. It is kind of watchable as a popcorn monster movie. Now, I have finished I haven't read an actual script for Godzilla 2. What I did was Spidey Fan gave me a link to part 1 of a series of videos someone did that basically just outlined the story. And I'm going to talk about both what I like about it and what I don't like about it. So, first things first, let me just say what the problem was. The problem was, of course, that the movie was successful, but everyone hated it. It was the same thing as Independence Day, just with a monster instead of aliens. I mean, watch the movie. It's the same goddamn story. And that's my other problem with that movie, but I'm not even going to get into that. And that's why the sequel never got shot. It was going to be. The movie was in pre-production, from what I heard. I don't know if that's true or not, but from what I heard, it was in pre-production when it was canceled. And And Emmerich was going to come... I think Emmerich was not going to come back on, actually, because for some reason he's against sequels, or at least he was, because there's going to be an Independence Day 2 and 3. God knows what they're going to do with that. Actually, you know what? That's one of his movies I can actually watch and enjoy is Independence Day, mainly because of Will Smith. Will Smith is one of my favorite actors, and that movie was my introduction to him. So Godzilla 2, on to that matter. Okay, so Godzilla 2 would have been a better movie than 98 for one main reason, and that's that it would have had other monsters in it. And that would have made it more of a monster movie than just a plain old disaster movie. Now, can you argue that the original Godzilla 54 was a disaster movie? Of course you can. It's about a nuclear disaster, basically. The thing about 54 is that 54 was also a Frankenstein-esque science experiment gone wrong kind of story. And while 98 had semblances of that, you didn't really see the aftermath of it. As I read in one review, it said that you watch New York City being taken apart and then you just go back to eating your popcorn. When you watch 54, you stare at the screen for minutes after Godzilla leaves Tokyo, just at all the pain and destruction he's caused. Just a very slow, quiet camera move of fire erupting from the streets and dead bodies. That was the whole aftermath, the aftermath of the science experiment gone wrong, Godzilla, and you never got that in 98. This movie would have had that, Godzilla 2, in a way, at least in my opinion. What the movie would have had was a reimagining of Monster Island. If you remember the beginning of 98, there was this island where Zilla was born, and it was like this nuclear testing facility in French Polynesia, and it comes back in this movie, and instead it's filled with other giant creatures. And not that the monsters are that creative, but at least they're there for things for Zilla to fight. It would have made the action more dynamic, since this franchise, as it would have been more of a rip-off of Jurassic Park than owing some stuff to Godzilla. Having fights between monsters definitely would have separated it from that, since while Jurassic Park has moments where dinosaurs fight each other, they last like 3 seconds, and they're very spread out amongst the movies. In fact, I think the only fight between dinosaurs in the first movie was just that last scene where the T-Rex was killing the Velociraptors. This movie would have had a couple of monster fights, mainly between Zilla and these bugs that were mutated on Monster Island. And from what I can gather from the script, they were supposed to be Mothra. And while they're very different from Mothra, you can see what was taken from Godzilla vs. Mothra. So that's one thing I have to give this script credit for, is that at least it takes elements from Godzilla movies and not just taking stuff from Independence Day, Jurassic Park, and all this other pop culture stuff from the 90s. This movie would have at least had some elements from other Godzilla movies, which 98 was extremely lacking. Elements like, the giant eggs all over the world that show up, and which is definitely from Godzilla vs. Mothra, the original. Because the first shot we see of Mothra in that movie isn't even Mothra, it's the egg on that beach. And this movie would have had very similar shots of giant cocooned eggs in different cities around the world. And being a Godzilla fan, that would have been pretty cool to see. My issue with the fact of reimagining Mothra is that there are so many other Godzilla monsters you could have done first. Like, yeah, Mothra was one of Godzilla's first opponents, but not his most interesting. Mothra has interesting elements to her. Admittedly, she's not one of my favorite monsters just in concept, not even in what's been done with her. Because she seems to be downplayed a lot, and this movie would have kind of done the same thing until the ending. While the monsters themselves act nothing like Mothra, since Mothra herself is a very good monster, someone who defends Earth. These creatures are just like aliens, basically. They lay their eggs and they have to get food. And it would have been cool as a monster movie, if nothing else. Ignoring the fact that this is a Godzilla movie, I'm talking about Godzilla 2 right now, of course, not 98. Ignoring that, it would have been a cool monster movie at least. There have been I've talked to a lot of people who say that the script, just reading it would have been a better movie than 98 was, and You know what? I agree and disagree, if that's possible. But we'll get to that in a little bit. I want to talk about the actual story first, since I haven't really brought that up. I've just kind of talked about what the movie was trying to be. And yeah, it was trying to be a remake of Godzilla vs. Mothra, but it was also pulling elements from Aliens, which I'll get into in the story. Basically what happens is the movie picks up about a couple months after Godzilla 98, and the sequel was set up, that was continued in the animated series, with the egg being left, only one, which eventually became the animated series, of course. Now, I'm not sure if this movie took any elements from the animated series, since I know it was written during the show's run, so it probably would have ignored that show as canon, which I don't blame it. Not that the show is bad, I just don't think it would have worked well in a live-action movie. I've heard people who disagree with me on that, but I just don't think heat and monsters like Commodothorax and T-Rex would have worked well on screen. The coolest story elements are of course the bugs and the idea that's brought over from the animated series, where Nick Tatopoulos finds the baby Zilla underground, and you know, it starts raising it, and that's in the first scene, and it goes on for like a month or so, and once everyone starts being suspicious of Nick stealing fish and stuff, Nick decides to let the baby Zilla go, and in a cool nod to Godzilla history. Now, I'm talking, of course, not about movies, but if you're like me and you have to get your hands on everything that has the word Godzilla on it, you might have read the Marvel Comics run of Godzilla, King of the Monsters. And in that run, there was a scene where Godzilla was like shrunken down, and there was this Japanese kid that was like watching over him, and Godzilla was like human-sized for like one issue, and Godzilla was in a trench coat and hat, looking kind of like Rorschach, and walking around Manhattan with his Japanese friend, you know, just to hide from the police and everyone. Godzilla in this movie would have done the same thing in the first scene. Nick was going to walk around with the baby Zilla in a trench coat and take him to the sea to be released. And it kind of went wrong, like it does in the comics, when Godzilla attacks a bum who tries to steal their money. And I think it was the same thing in the script. I don't really remember, but admittedly I haven't read it in like a week, because of course I went on vacation, as all of you know. So I do remember a lot of details, but not everything. So I don't remember exactly what happened. I think that it just ended up in a fight. Anyway, so Nick releases the baby Zilla, and it goes swimming around the world and grows. And 2 years later, he's marrying Audrey from the first movie, and she's dropped like a shitty pair of underwear, to quote James Rolfe. The movie literally has Audrey in it for 2 frickin' seconds, and then she doesn't have one line. She barely even gets mentioned throughout the story. And it's kind of insulting to people who are married, especially to women who recently married women, because what happens is Nick is kidnapped by Felipe on their wedding day, right after the last wedding bells go off and they're running out the chapel. Felipe from the first movie kidnaps Nick because of the belief that Godzilla's back. I'm going to call him Godzilla, because that's what he's called in the script, so I'm going to call it Godzilla. I know it's not Godzilla, but for the sake of sanity, I'm going to have to call it that. The creature in this movie, Godzilla, is believed to be causing destruction all over the world. And Nick tells Felipe about what he did about 2 years earlier, and Felipe's, of course, pissed. And, if you don't know who Felipe is, he's from the first movie. He's the French secret agent who came over from France to... oh boy, I'm drawing a blank here. I haven't seen the movie in a while. They were here to kill Zilla and find the eggs and everything. Also, apparently, there would have been a scene in the opening of this movie, right before Nick finds the baby, when they took pieces off the dead Godzilla from the first movie, and were doing autopsies and scientific experiments on it because of its ability to hold radiation or something. I don't really remember the exact words. But scientists were basically just studying different pieces of Godzilla. And